Welcome to another Gamma Partner Artist Feature interview. Today we speak with Schwonk. We speak on all things his journey, the hike that he's on, creating Western style art, growing up in Montana, his love for Bitcoin, the confluence between the digital and the physical, and a little bit of philosophy. I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. All right, very excited to have Schwonk with us today. Schwonk has been a partner artist on Gamma for quite some time now. You can see a piece behind him, which I'm really looking forward to digging into. Schwonk, you've got a very, I would say obvious, reference or style when it comes to creating Western style art, but I'm really looking forward to finding out where that came from. But more so, tell your story. You can go all the way back to when you were a child and you first maybe started feeling creative, right up until this point. But yeah, enough from me. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brett. Yeah, stoked to be here. And my artistic journey goes all the way back as long as I can remember. My mother is an artist, and so she was putting watercolors and markers and things in my hands since I was like 2. And I remember my earliest memory is that my brother was a better artist than I was, but he doesn't really make art anymore. But some about it stuck. And then I had key figures through my childhood. Middle school, I had a really great art teacher who then ended up being my art teacher through high school. There was only 2 art classes in high school, and she created art 3 and 4 so that me and another student could continue to take art classes through high school. I ended up doing some art in college, but I dropped out there because I wasn't really inspired by my professors. I thought they were cool people, but nobody was making art that inspired me, nor were they selling it. And I was already starting to sell some of my paintings. So it was kind of from my mother to some key people that believed in me. The art teacher in high school, by the time I was a junior in high school, I was playing basketball, and I wasn't really into wanting to be an artist, but it was something I was really good at. My notebooks were filled with sketches and drawings. I didn't take notes. I just drew pictures all the time. But she really believed in me, and one time she took some small little copy of a Van Gogh that I had been sketching on for a few weeks and putting a lot of time into with like a torn edge. I didn't care. I was just kind of having fun with it. And she entered it into an art show, and it won best of show. And I was just like shocked. I didn't even know I was entered into it. But she just was always encouraging me to do that. And it wasn't until I got to college when I didn't make the basketball team at Montana State here, and I'm in the dorms and I'm trying to figure out something to do. And so I picked up a bunch of paints and I just started messing around, and people started offering to buy them just in the dorms. And I wasn't selling them for much at all, but that's when my wheels started turning. And I'm like, oh, maybe this could be because I was a broke college student, and then shortly thereafter, I did a few years of college and dropped out, and I had started doing a lot of like landscapes. And my first big like love was trying to copy the Impressionists. There was something about how they captured light and the expressive brushwork, and Van Gogh and Monet, and so the Impressionists and post-Impressionists were like very impactful on me early. I also was doing a lot of live paintings with my friends' bands, and I would get up and I would do like performance art where I'd try to finish the painting by the end of the thing. And those looked way different. Those were very abstract, and would get kind of Picasso-esque with weird limbs shaped in different positions and kind of grotesque looking things sometimes. And other times they'd be very psychedelic and kind of cubic. And so then that kind of led me into trying to develop my cubism voice. So cubism was kind of the next like thing that I fell in love with, that I tried to emulate. And those first 2 styles, which is always the way that I recommend artists develop a voice, is find what they like and then just try to copy it the best they can. I mean, not 1-to-1, but like if Monet were to paint this scene that I want to paint, how would he paint it? And you try your best, and it's not going to be a Monet, but you're gonna have some development of what your voice is, as an artist. And I think trying to copy and emulate great artists is the best way to do that. That's what I always, tell other people that are coming up. But to me, there was something about these first two avant-garde periods, and there were others, but to me, they were the ones that stood out, that I really loved aesthetically. But then as I continued to follow that path, I didn't like what came after it, and art history and philosophically the ideas that were associated with it. And to me, like a lot of modern art, and there's abstract art that I love, but there's something about it that to me is like missing a depth and its connection to things that are true, good, and beautiful in an objective way, and like a sunset, like like think of like the Sistine Chapel, or like all these classical, beautiful pieces that are just, you go into an old church and they're just jaw dropping to look at and to behold. And oftentimes I think in modern art, people are celebrating like pain or emotion, and they just want to express these things. And it's not that those things are bad. I mean, take like the Pietà, right? If you want to celebrate something that's broken and painful, like I don't know what could be a more painful or broken scene than a mother holding her dead son in her arms. But it's beautiful. I mean, there's the way that Michelangelo carved that, it's jaw dropping. And so to me, there's something objective about beauty that is so often lost in modern art, that it's like this relativistic standpoint that beauty just has to be this isolated personal thing, that that's beautiful for you and this is what's beautiful for me. And there is a subjective element to everybody. We're subjects, but we're also objects. There's something objectively real about us, and it's those objectively true things that tie us together. And beauty is the easiest one. People can have all kinds of different debates about religion and politics and the right way to do this or that or whatever, and it's hard to ever prove one way or the other on a lot of these things. But with beauty, it's like it's just sort of, it's much more self-evident on when there's something that's objectively beautiful. It's kind of undeniable in a lot of instances. And I think of the easiest ones are like sunsets, or very things that are in nature that stand out, that are beautiful. So these things like really inspired me, but my trajectory artistically was going down this path, kind of mimicking and following when things went, because Impressionism was like the first avant-garde roughly. And then Picasso there's a few others, but then Picasso really opened things up with Cubism. And then Pandora's box blew open. And within like 20 years, we had people tying dogs to walls and starving them to death, and putting crucifixes in piss, and being overtly impulsive and ugly on purpose, and then calling it art. And I like to say anything done well is art. So maybe if you're trying to be ugly on purpose and you're doing it well, it's art, but it's ugly. Or, I don't, and I have a lot of friends that are artists, and a lot of them will make much more contemporary things. And I've made a lot of abstract art too. So like, I'm not just trying to be a hater on anything like this, but this is just sort of the line of thinking that informed where I ended up artistically with what I'm creating. And I still make abstract art. So call me a hypocrite, whatever. But so what I wanted to do was take these styles of Impressionism and Cubism and sort of my own voicing of these things that arguably aren't either of those things, but it's my own version of them. And instead of sending them off in the night towards nihilism and pointlessness and ugliness, I wanted to take those expressive avant-garde styles and then turn them back towards objective beauty. So it's kind of hard to see in here, and maybe we'll check it out later, but I still wanted to incorporate these elements subtly in kind of where my work is currently going. And then there was like a big interrupt in my artistic journey. I got married, and I was dating my now wife long distance. and we got married, and we were married long distance. We were going back and forth across the country. She lived on one end, I lived on the other, and we wanted to have a family and do all these things. And so I started up a small business, a medical cannabis business here in Montana. And I thought it was going to be like easy money and I could keep doing my art and do all this thing. And it ended up being, it was just a regulatory nightmare. Like the government was up everybody's ass and was, you know, it was a nightmare. It was just, there were parts of it that were great, like the actual cultivation of the plants and like getting to know the medicinal qualities. And we were helping a lot of people, you know, with cancer protocols and people with PTSD that, you know, a lot of people getting a lot of help from this kind of thing. So that there was this beautiful element to it as well. And for a while I was still making my art, but then it ended up consuming me, and sort of took over my whole life. And I would wake up and I would have these like fever, like nighttime fever dreams where I thought like the warehouses were flooding, and I would like run back over there, and like one time it was flooding, and then so it just kept happening, and I would have all this, I had a lot of anxiety and I just couldn't ever put it down. And so it was kind of a brutal thing, just that I wasn't handling it mentally well, and it pulled me away from my art. And I made this deal with myself so that I'd only do this if I could keep making my art, because I was clearly my calling. I had been doing it already for almost a decade before that. And I got to this point where I was no longer making art for probably a year and a half, a few years into the project. And then I got diagnosed with cancer. And I think I was 30 when I got diagnosed. And that was like this, I'd been like praying and begging and trying to figure out a way to exit, but I'd built up this business all around me. Like my life was like a tumor at that point of stress, kind of, you know? And so, you know, our body, I think, has this deep innate intelligence. And, you know, whether it was, you know, I believe it was a gift from God, but I think it was also the intelligence of my body that created a pathway. And I think the cancer, and this was clear to me from the beginning, it was a gift. It was a pathway for me to force me to stop what was going on and give me a legitimate excuse, because I had my chest was filled with lymphoma. It was all around my heart. It was most of it, which was just like, that was the other thing. It was like I was carrying all this chest stress there. And so I started just winding things down, exited the business. I'll keep that part of the story shorter, and went and took care of the cancer mostly naturally. Got rid of about 95% of it without doing any traditional protocols like cancer and chemo and radiation and things. And we ended up doing about 1/8 the amount of chemo at the very end to get rid of a couple small spots that I still had on me. And it was when I was going through cancer treatments that I was able to put everything down, and I started painting again. And I was doing kind of like these vision quests, doing some of these hyperthermia treatments at this treatment center down in Arizona. And they would heat your internal body temperature up to like 104 degrees for hours. It would take you a few hours to get up there, be under this dome. You have a nurse there like giving you water, and like, I mean, it was crazy. It was like a 5 or 6 hour thing every time we did it. We did it every like few weeks, and they'd start you off by giving you Xanax and THC, but it was like too much for me. I didn't want that. And I got like claustrophobic and anxious at first, but then we dropped the dosing way down. And then I was able to breathe and meditate through the whole thing. And I've never done like the sweat lodge, and, you know, when they go under like the mound, and done that. But this is what I imagined it was like, because it felt like it was climbing a mountain. You'd slowly like hike up to the next degree higher, and you go half a degree higher. And it felt like you really have to breathe and meditate your way up there. And so I had like kind of, and I got to like just stop and like heal and reflect and just do all the healing I needed. And through that process, I started making art again. And I came back to myself and came back to my creative journey. And in that way, I view the cancer was a gift. And there was some pretty hairy moments. At one point, my jugular got sepsis where my port was, and I was like convulsing, and they had me on the way to the hospital. But the whole time I was seeing all these other people around me at this treatment center, and there were people there that had stage 4 cancer that had been alive for like over 10 years. And one woman I knew, she had stage 4 cancer, and she's still alive like 38, 39, probably almost 40 years later now, that she's just been living with it and thriving. Other people would come in and their cancer would progress very quickly. And I'm not saying this is universal. Everybody's health journey is different, but like, it was amazing to see the power of the mind to keep some people alive in certain situations and how quickly people would pass away. I mean, I literally would see people come in and they would just not have any will to live, and a few weeks later they'd be dead. So that was like a really impactful experience on my life journey, but also my creative journey, to just really value what I feel is my calling as an artist. I mean, primarily my vocation and my marriage and my children, like that's number one. But after that, being an artist, I really do feel it as like a calling. And so it was like this cosmic swirl getting back to making art. And so the last, I guess it's been like 4 years now, and I've been doing a lot of commission work. I made some like large, it'd be cool if we could, maybe I'll share some of this at some point, but large, it's a very different vein of art than what I do with all my Western stuff. Traditional religious iconography for churches. So I did like a big 11.5-foot San Damiano crucifix that's up at a local church here, big like 4-foot gilded gold icon stuff. And I've been working on a lot of those, but I have this hunger in me to get back to making the art that like I would make, kind of in the same trajectory that I initially had been going on. I really wanted to continue that journey. So the creative journey I view as like a hike. It's like you're hiking across a landscape, you know, and I love hiking. I live out here in Montana, and I love going for hikes. And that's kind of the way I see it. It's like every painting you make, it's like a new vista, and you're always curious on what's like around the next corner and the next corner. And once you get to that next view, it's amazing, but it's like there's still more of the mountain that you want to go to. And so it's like each step is like your favorite, but then you just motivated to keep going, and you never could have got to the ones closer to the top if you hadn't done the ones that came before it. And so I was like really hungry to continue this journey. And then I discovered ordinals. And I like already had loved Bitcoin for a long time. I was sitting getting my infusions, and I'd be like watching the charts and doing some degen trading and shit and whatever. And I was fascinated by the potential. And ever since I'd read the white paper, I was pretty sold about it, and just about its potential to change the world, really. And when I saw that we could combine art and Bitcoin, that's what sold me. And I never really got into NFTs before that, because I understood that they were on Amazon web servers somewhere, and I had seen collections disappear, and I just, I wasn't very attracted to it. But once I saw the immutability, that's what sold me. That's actually on chain. And so that's when I dove into creating a Bitcoin Western world. And I had been creating Western pieces, since like about 2010, off and on. I was making a lot of other things, but I've grown up in the American West my whole life, out here in Montana since 2007. And so I've always been around that kind of culture and the beauty of the American West. It's a majestic, beautiful place. And I think the cowboy is an amazing symbol. I've rode horses maybe a dozen times in my life, but, and I've had some fence digging posts, slamming the rod into the ground, putting up post fences and stuff in my younger days. So I've worked on some ranches a little bit, but I wouldn't call myself a cowboy in the literal sense. But I think that, you know, most kids, I think, played, you know, cowboys when they were growing up. And there's kind of this romantic image of the cowboy in the American West as an explorer and a vigilante or a, you know, whatever. And I now see the cowboy as this amazing symbol of natural virtue and man living in harmony and with dominion appropriately over nature and with nature. And I think putting the cowboy in these majestic landscapes as a symbol like that is like the perfect subject and medium to connect my experience of life and where I've grown up and enjoyed, you know, adventuring and things with these ideas that I was kind of toying around with behind my artistic style. And then I dove into the Bitcoin Trail collection, which we'll check out here, I'm sure, in a little bit. And in my mind, I always knew that these were just sort of concept drawings. And I wanted to start making large detailed oil paintings where I was incorporating these different stylistic elements that I had developed early on in my art career before I kind of had this interlude or, you know, sidetrack or whatever. And it feels now that I'm just starting. This feels like my first painting of my career. Is I feel I'm excited about it. It's fresh. I've put a ton of work into it. And even though I've had, and since, I mean, I've been painting very actively since 2007, but selling my work since about 2009, it feels like I'm just starting. You know, like I've just been developing my voice. And so I'm really thrilled to start sharing the work that I'm embarking on now. And it feels like the seeds of all that, and the first artwork that I was making just because I was passionate about it after being sick and going through that whole thing was the Bitcoin Trail collection that I was inscribing onto Bitcoin. So, you know, I'm very thankful for all these commissions I got and the opportunity to be able to provide for my family doing work like that. But it's just like a siren calling me back to continuing the journey and making the work that, I feel like I'm called to make. No, I guess in a nutshell, that's my history and how I came up with my voicing and how I got to where I'm at now making paintings like this.
Yeah, look, it's quite the story. There's so much to discuss. I think the recurring theme was that there's been these like moments of learning, or almost perhaps like call them rebirths, or sort of like a stimulus at certain points in your life that have perhaps not changed you, but like evolved the way in which you think and which you create. Like, I know you touched on a lot of them, but what's been the most impactful? And obviously coming back to this style, circling right back to the start that you said, just things that we can all acknowledge are objectively beautiful. Yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big influence. The true good and the beautiful is something that is laced into a lot of Thomistic theology and philosophy. And my faith is very important to me. Mm-hmm. And it's something that has informed a lot of my worldview and my, something that I kind of read my way into in college as well. I love reading nonfiction and studying philosophy and theology and different viewpoints. I spent a few years really intensely in college studying Eastern religions. And I was raised in a Christian home, but it was through the studying and reading and arguing and enjoying doing that with a lot of friends, which, I wouldn't say it's not commonplace, but there's, I don't know, in the culture at wide, there's a lot of really sensitivity around that. But I really thrived in my college years, and I was very blessed to have a lot of friends who had a very diverse viewpoints and opinions, and we were able to have rich, dialogues and debates. And we had these events called Liberty Pub nights where we'd have people come over and we'd all drink beer, and people would, bullshit and debate and argue, and we'd have presenters and things. And so it was like this very rich creative thing. And I was living with guys that were in bands, and so there's a lot of music, a lot of philosophy, a lot of that kind of thing. It was a great time in my life that I would say that, but for me, it ended up kind of sending me off on making my faith my own and understanding why I believe what I believe. And I believe that the true, good, and the beautiful are kind of these things that are associated with, the idea that God is love. And these are objective realities, even though they're not tangible things. They're very real things that everybody would acknowledge are real. Like, I guess the idea of notion of love, right? Or, maybe people challenge the existence of truth, but I think truth absolutely does exist, and that it's something that we should all pursue, with all of our hearts. So to me, that desire and that longing for what's good and true and beautiful is probably the driving desire behind wanting to create and make something beautiful, striving for goodness. I think that's where a lot of people, whether they would say it or not, are creating out of that desire to make something good. Because I'm sure every artist can relate to the idea of finishing a painting and putting yourself into it, because it really is a mark of your soul when you put yourself into a painting, and just having the satisfaction, regardless of what type of style or you're working or whatever, and just feeling grateful and proud of making something is, I think, also a pretty universal human, apart from just people that are overtly artists, that people should be able to relate to. And I also come back to this idea of anything done well is art. So I really like to try to help people see that even if you're not painting or playing music or whatever, you're probably still an artist. Like, if there's anything that you feel like you have a knack for, or you have a gift for, that you've put time into to develop, that you're getting better at, that you're developing, whatever, you're an artist. You're doing something well. And ultimately the top art, like, is to be well. Right. And so this kind of ontological, I don't know, it kind of gets wishy-washy a little bit, but I guess putting me on the spot to put my finger on it, but that's the best I can, I guess, surmise.
No, for sure. And that's the whole point. And it was interesting a bit earlier, you brought up creating for yourself versus, being commissioned to create certain works. How do you put yourself fully into what you're being commissioned to, when it's, I suppose, that's work you're getting paid, but it's not something that you're necessarily choosing to create? And then, in comparison, talk about creating for yourself.
Yeah, it's a really interesting subject. I use, my opinion on it has changed over the years. I used to just kind of like have this grudge against commissions, even though I needed to be doing them. I kind of would just do them and grumble about them. But I read Stephen Pressfield's book, The War of Art. Are you familiar with that book?
I haven't read it, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, man, everybody should read it, but especially anybody that's working in a creative realm, especially artists. He talks about resistance, and that being like anything that is distracting you or keeping you from your life's work, basically. And he also, kind of losing my train of thought, but he also talks about going pro. And he talks about writers like Hemingway and other artists and writers. He's a writer himself, Pressfield. He talks about like getting up and not waiting for the muse to come visit you to create, but you go show up whether the muse is there or not. And when you show up and you avail yourself, the muse will come, right? And that's what professionals do. So when I read that, it was kind of a turning point for me to be like, okay, I need to not just paint when I feel like it, if I'm going to be doing this and if this is my calling, I need to do it, rain or shine, whether I feel like it or not. Like people do when they have a job to do, right? People do when they're a professional at something. And so, that was a turning point for me. And so the commissions ended up being that, where I would sharpen my skills and I would try really hard to empathize with the client, put myself in their shoes, and and I had some like really meaningful commissions. Maybe they weren't meaningful to me personally, but I had a guy commission a painting of his best friend that passed away in a motorcycle accident, and painting him going down the highway on his motorcycle and with the landscape in the background. Or I've done pet portraits. I've done more pet portraits than I care to always admit in my day. It's been a minute, but people love their pets. Like if you have a pet that you love and they pass away, I've cried harder when I had a dog I love that died suddenly and tragically than I think I'd have when any family member that I love dearly like passed away. I don't know what it is. I think we just like deposit all these emotions into our pets and whatever. But when somebody comes to you and they're like, they want that. So I don't really feel like painting your dog, but I can relate, right? So it was like growth and empathy, as well as being like an opportunity to sharpen my skills, and I'm getting paid, so I should just be thankful, right? That's kind of the way I ended up thinking about it. And then there's commissions that do resonate on a deep level. So some of these sacred art commissions, like getting to do something that's on kind of a grand scale in a giant sanctuary that's over 10 feet tall and laden with real gold and things like that. That was, those images, traditional iconography, you think like Byzantine style type stuff, that was kind of influenced. I tried to create a new version of it, but it was very traditional at the same time. A little bit brighter color palette is what the priest was requesting me to do. I kind of wish I could just show you that right now, but it was much less about having any kind of original voice and making something creatively that is going to be prayed with and meditated on and cherished by a community that has frankly nothing to do with me. I mean, I know a lot of the people in the community or whatever, but I mean, that could be there for long after I'm no longer alive. So having some type of a bigger transcendent good that I'm working towards also was something that allowed me to mature and grow in ways. And contrasting that with making art for myself, I think that it helped me do that, because then when it comes around and it's something that I'm not doing firstly for somebody else, but making because it's springing forth myself, it's the contrast between a little kid sitting down at a piano and impulsively slamming on keys and like a more developed or masterful pianist taking that same urge to play, but of taking the discipline that they've put years and years and years into mastering and playing a beautiful piano piece spontaneously. And I think discipline applied is the difference between impulse and spontaneity. Like true spontaneity requires discipline. Is that little kid pounding on the keys truly spontaneous, or is he just impulsively playing? So I think that commission work, if you're an artist and you've never had to do commission work, awesome, because they're not that fun, and you can definitely apply discipline and get better at your craft not doing them. But that's the function that they serve for me, is to help me with my discipline and becoming a professional at what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way to put it. And you mentioned, and we sort of heard it in your story as you're introducing yourself, and throughout these pivotal moments, they have been journey-like or hike-like. Like you use the analogy of going for that hike through Montana and wanting to know what's around that next corner. And obviously there was some pivotal moments, obviously, through your childhood, and then studying and having influential teachers, and then obviously getting sick, and then having a family and having a long distance relationship prior to that. All of these moments, it's interesting. Let's pull up, Bitcoin Trail. And obviously, the moment you found ordinals, that's another moment. there are all these moments throughout your life that I'm sure have been impactful and been part of this hike as a metaphor.
Yeah, it is interesting. I hadn't thought of it overtly that way, but Bitcoin Trail, a proof of work Western, that collection is kind of like a trailhead for me. It's sort of like I've hiked in to the trailhead. My whole journey up to this point was like hiking to the trailhead. I got lost for a minute, came back, and then I made it to the trailhead. And Bitcoin Trail is kind of like the trailhead, or a trailhead. I sort of metaphorically, if you could, because there's different worlds and characters, and it's rather illustrative. You've characterized it that way before. And there's bulls and bears and miners and Rexies and frogs and proof of work stuff and babes, and there's all these kind of different things going on there that are different aspects that when I was first showed up to Bitcoin ordinals, and I'd been hearing about it. I'm like, gosh, I got to get in there and check that out. Got to get in and check it out. I think it was like March or April, May. It was March or May that I got into it of 23, and went into the spaces. I'm like, all right, I'm just going to start talking to people, and I'm just having a bunch of people like ribbit at me. Like I was like asking a question, and I just get like 4 or 5 people being like ribbit, whatever. All the frog people. Shout out to y'all, wherever you guys are behind the PFPs. But and then there's the cool ideas and the debates around the technology, from the white paper, and is that where we're really at now? And a lot of people thinking that they know more than Satoshi, and Bitcoin going from being this cypherpunk, this is going to replace the dollar, to this is going to strengthen the dollar and the governments are loving it. Like what's going on here? And like to me, there's a very rich, interesting intellectual continuation from what I was studying and learning about economics and philosophy in college. The extension of that is kind of here, and so intellectually and artistically, Bitcoin's an amazing place to be continuing to be an artist. I understand why there's a lot of people that maybe aren't putting their art on Bitcoin yet, because maybe they don't make that connection. But there's obviously a lot of artists that are here making amazing art. And, I guess I'm just stoked to also be putting my art on Bitcoin. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier about how you had an appreciation for Bitcoin already and had read the white paper and it had been quite influential on you. Yeah. Why did it strike you the way it did initially, and then, philosophically, and then to be able to create art on it, which you were already an artist for some time? An interesting kind of marriage of events.
Yeah. I was stoked because I thought I was going to take down the central bank. I was like, when I first, my friend Brad, shout out to you, Brad. He like showed me the white paper and was talking about it, and I was trying to wrap my head around it. Unfortunately, I did not take his advice on setting up a wallet when I first heard about it. I think I heard about it in like 2010. I mean, it was really early when I first heard about it, and I had somebody telling me to do it. And I was just really excited about it. And this was coming out of the 2008 crisis, and I was hanging out in a lot of libertarian circles and Austrian economics, Rothbard and Mises guys that were talking a lot about all that kind of thing. And then somebody brings up Bitcoin and talked about it. And that's kind of what my first impression was. I was just really excited that this is something that's going to end statism, and we're going to have this new world of, we're going to fix the money and fix the world kind of thing. Right. I think that's sort of one of the ideas out there. And, but then I slept on it. I just wasn't, I think I even put half an effort to go to some page to start figuring out. I'm like, a wallet? What do you mean a wallet? You know, I was, I didn't get it at first. And I didn't actually get back into things until like late 2015, early 2016, when I started taking a little bit more notice and putting in some due diligence on things. But yeah, that was my first initial impression of Bitcoin. Was sort of this fuck the man, fuck the state kind of thing. But
I think that's an interesting way to put it, and it's something that certainly, I don't know if that ethos is. I don't think that ethos is gone, but it's certainly it's certainly changed. It's funny that you said that though. You know, like even that. Oh, a wallet. What do you mean wallet? So you live between two worlds really in terms of your art, because you have art on Bitcoin, you hold Bitcoin, you have a digital wallet, but you also have like a traditional audience. You've been, like you just talked about before, you've been commissioned to create physical art. You still create physical art. Yeah. How do you navigate the middle of those two worlds?
Yeah, I honestly, I don't feel like I totally fit in either world, to be honest. And it was something that I was just thinking about kind of leading up to this interview, is I don't feel like I fit in with a lot of the other, I don't know if I want to say genres or styles or whatever that I see in the ordinal space. And I definitely have made some very traditional artworks. Like this painting here would fit in great in a, contemporary Western art gallery. But I'm also putting my art on Bitcoin. So like I don't feel like I can totally relate to either world. And so if I can't fit in, I gotta stand out somehow. And part of how I'm trying to do that, and I know I'm not the only one to do this, so it's not like I think I'm unique in doing it, but connecting the physical art to the art on chain. And I'm calling it OCPs, on-chain certificates of provenance. And when I started talking to some people in the chats that I'm in, they immediately brought up SAT chips. And I think that SAT chips are amazing. There's some strengths above that SAT chips have with holding the private keys permanently on the chip that may be a strength above OCPs. And I guess I'll describe briefly what OCP is. It's basically just taking your art and making it into a cold wallet where you obfuscate the private keys and show the public key. Probably lives on the back of the piece. At least that's where mine are going to live. I don't, it depends on if you got a sculpture or painting or whatever. And I may not even be the first person to do that. I'm sure I'm not. I've heard of other people doing things like it, but I'm doing it in a way that is purposefully trying to anchor my art's provenance on chain so that in 50 to 100, 200, whatever years, you can prove its authenticity by demonstrating that this is the one that contains the ordinal. And if it ever came down to it, you could reveal that seed phrase and really prove that you have the authentic one. It would just make it much harder to have a fake, right? And I was doing some research about this, and apparently it's a multi-billion-dollar fraud problem in the, money laundering upper echelons of the fine art world. But when you're buying and selling a bunch of dead artists' paintings for tons of money, and apparently there are artists out there who are making shit tons of money copying old masterpieces, because that's a thing, I guess. I don't know. It was kind of news to me. Like, I'm sure that I thought that had happened occasionally or whatever, but apparently it's like a massive business. So this could solve that someday if every artist started just, inscribing a simple picture, even a cell phone shot. They don't even have to do anything complicated, and then just go inscribe it on chain, throw it in a wallet, throw the keys on the back of it. You wouldn't even have to hide the private. I mean, just do something, some version of an OCP. And I would love to see this just become common practice for people making physical art. Is just, why not just anchor it on chain? If it's something that you think is important and you're trying to make a body of work and you're trying to be, a hobbyist or a pro at what you're doing with art that you'd like to leave a legacy of, put it on chain. Why not? It just prevent it from ever, Van Gogh didn't sell shit during his life, very little. Yeah, I think you get the idea, right? That if, even if you're not selling a ton of work, still put it on chain, do an OCP.
Totally, I agree. I think that one thing which I implore artists to do, regardless of how they get it on chain, is preserve part of themselves, preserve part of their artistic legacy, even if it's just one thing, because obviously everyone can afford different amounts and whatnot. But I truly think it's important. It's something that hasn't been possible until now. Yeah, the art fraud thing. There's a TV show, I haven't seen it, a documentary that came out called Made You Look. So for people who are listening to this, I encourage you to watch that, because that dives right into what you were talking about before, the business of fake art, which is kind of wild. And that's why I think it's incredible that you can authenticate your work in this way. That must be, I know you just alluded to it, but that must be very special, feel particularly pertinent when you've been creating work for this long, the fact that you can now do that in this way, at least.
Yeah, I mean, it feels cool. I'm not super concerned about it, honestly. I think it's novel and it's cool, and that's why, and for verifying my art, but honestly for immediate sales that I'm having, or if I sell out of a gallery or get a commission, and I inscribe those things on chain, or I'm going to put this one on chain and do the gamma prints or whatever, I'm not worried about somebody faking my art anytime soon, right? And there's higher chance than not that I'm not going to be a Caravaggio or a Van Gogh or whatever. It's like becoming like Michael Jordan, right? But I think that it's in the principle of the thing that is important to be doing it, because you never know. And if I am making art that I hope lasts. So if I'm making art that I hope lasts, then why not set that up to be as secure and authenticatable, that's a word, as possible.
Authentic.
Authentic.
Authentifiable. I'm not sure what the word is. And yeah, you mentioned prints. You've leaned into the culture as well. Obviously, you've created different types of art. Like you said, I'd love to see the breadth of your art. You said that there's cubism and what was the word you described it as when you were creating up on stage while your friends were playing music? I can't remember.
It's like performance. I think it was kind of performance art, but the style was very abstract and expressive. And I've got multiple kind of other bodies of work that a lot of it, I've put a bunch of them on chain, and I haven't really pushed them a whole lot. I've shared a little bit of them here or there early on my Twitter account, but I may have even gone back and deleted them, because it's not where things are at now. And I do kind of envision someday, putting it all together and showing, because I think it is enjoyable to see the progression. And I could definitely like pick out pieces that you lay them all next to each other in a progression, and you can definitely clearly see the evolution and the influence down that path. But I want to kind of get through, I don't know, this. I want to get through the hike first, kind of, and then maybe in a retrospect or something I can go back. But I want to spend my time making new work right now rather than trying to push old work, I guess. And I'm doing a little bit of that. 2023 is kind of ancient when Ordinals Day is, relatively speaking. So I'm kind of re-releasing and making available the Bitcoin Trail one of ones that didn't sell in the first round, and there's some more recent ones that are there and have been added to the collection. So that's why I'm excited about this upcoming release that I'm doing called Megaliths. Is back in the Bitcoin Trail collection. Maybe we could pull that up. There's these megalithic blocks coming out of the landscape or flying through the sky. And I wanted to develop those themes more, but with a more refined, detailed, beautiful images. And there was one that was of a cowboy in front of a megalithic block that was a big, yeah, this one. And this was one of the first ones that sold out of the collection. And I think we called it, I don't know if it's the title that's on it there, but Rippin' a 4-megger was the title the collector and I came up with. That he's an OG node running ordinals guy, and he picked it up and he really liked it. And but this idea of these megalithic blocks and the landscape being Bitcoin, and also symbolizing kind of the full potential of where Bitcoin is going. And I think anybody that has understood the history of Bitcoin and has read the white paper and has read what Satoshi wrote, you know, there was a big debate. This might be a hot button thing with some people between, you know, big blocks and small blocks, but these are megalithic blocks, right? So, and this is where I do think Bitcoin is going. Eventually, we need to scale on layer one if it's ever to be peer-to-peer digital cash. You know, I think the digital gold narrative, and this is going to trigger some people, is a psyop to that Bitcoin was crippled. And I still love Bitcoin, and I think Bitcoin is where the hash is. BTC is Bitcoin, but there are other chains of Bitcoin that have the same history, and there's a raging debate about this thing, and maybe people think it's settled, and I acknowledge that 90 whatever percent of the hash is pointing at one chain. And I think Bitcoin is where the hash is, but Bitcoin is more than just where the hash is. Bitcoin is also an idea. Bitcoin is you. Bitcoin is me. Bitcoin lives in the minds of men. And Bitcoin is not this just totally static thing. It's a living thing that is, you know, like ordinals is the perfect example of how Bitcoin is continuing to evolve and grow. And I think Bitcoin is going to continue to evolve and grow. The Bitcoin story is just getting started. And it's a beautiful, amazing, rich story that's really exciting. But there's something about big blocks that I love and has always interested me. I haven't been putting my art on other chains until just recently. I think I'm going to be spreading my art out onto multiple chains of Bitcoin, primarily anchored here in BTC ordinals, because it's where the hash is, it's where the market is, it's where the action is. But I think anybody saying that they know what the future holds in crypto is kidding themselves. You know, and maybe they're right. It does seem like BTC is going to be king, but I don't think BTC in 50 or 100 years is going to look the same as it does today. And that is probably what it's going to be. Probably will be BTC. You know, 99% sure, right? Whatever the percent of the hash is. But BTC will look very different, I think. And there's some pretty wild proposals out there that I think are horrible ideas by people that are very influential in the Bitcoin world. You know, like proposing a tax on people's wallets, things like that. They're, you know, crazy ideas. But, you know, adding OpCat would be amazing. That'd be really cool. There's a lot of people that want to see that added. You know, maybe we'll see some cats and some drawings and some Bitcoin trail sketches soon. I don't know. But I often have a lot of derivatives or my own versions of derivatives in the Bitcoin trail collection. But the megalithic blocks, Bitcoin being a landscape in this sci-fi Bitcoin-inspired Western world is what fueled the inspiration for this collection that I'm releasing called Megaliths, which are these megalithic blocks coming out of the landscape. And if you have one of those images, could we pull those up?
Send me a few. So I'm pulling up the first one, and then we'll pull up the other couple.
Yeah, cool. So this is like one flying through the sky. And will you pull up the other one too? Because the other one's got the megalithic block coming out of the landscape.
Let's do it.
The block is obviously symbolic of the blockchain and of Bitcoin, but there's also something like ancient. You know, like you think of like the pyramids, and we look at the pyramids and we're like, man, how did they build those? And there's some type of like ancient technology or wisdom that was needed to like build them, and they knew something that we don't know today or something like that. And that's kind of what I see when I see these massive cubes coming out of the landscape, but almost like it's coming from the future and from the mind, as far as the pyramids are to the past. It might not even make sense, but that's kind of the vibe I get from them. There's something ancient about them, but rather than it casting me into the past like the pyramids do, it's meant to cast me into the future about Bitcoin's potential and how it's going to be changing the world. It's like this bit consciousness, if you will, of the full potential of what Bitcoin is going to do and how much more it's going to impact things. I think Bitcoin is the solution to general AI, the problems that AI is going to render, that we're seeing with how are you going to ever be able to tell anything that's real when anything can just be faked by AI, by anybody very easily with a simple prompt. I mean, this VO3, have you seen VO3 stuff? It's like you cannot tell some of these that are these AI videos aren't real.
Oh yeah.
And the internet needs a filter, and a costly signal is something that can be produced either by burning proof of work or by locking up coins and spending an opportunity cost. And these are ideas that have been developed by devs in BSV. And a lot of the people, the Unisat guys, a lot of the people that provided the rails and the tools that allowed ordinals to really blow up were developers that came over from BSV, because they were working with a more developed tool set, or a older tool set, depending on how you're looking at it, of Bitcoin. And they were able to come into the BTC with the constraints and, help us all have the party that's been BTC ordinals. And you talk to a lot of those guys, and I've talked to a lot of them, that they have a much deeper, kind of profound understanding of Bitcoin and its potential than kind of some of the more dominant state adopted, corporate adopted ideas of what Bitcoin is and what it should be. And to me, these images are kind of trying to call to that, with the beauty of the majestic American West and the cowboy seeking truth and exploring this new digital frontier, to spark or call something alive that's in all of us, about that we know maybe there's something more to this technology than it just being a digital rock. And there's a lot of people that will deny that, and a lot of people will say that that's bullshit, and I get it, but I like the debate, and I kind of like the more dreamy, romantic, futurist angle to all of it. It's much more enjoyable for me, at least, to entertain that side of it. But I also understand arguments on the other side of it as well. So I just like being in the space and thinking about it and enjoying Bitcoin and making some Bitcoin themed art.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's fascinating you brought up, other chains. Obviously, Gamma and Xverse Wallet and Leather Wallet, we were all able to build very quickly onto Bitcoin after being on stacks, which was as close as we ever thought. Obviously, like slightly different link across to Bitcoin, but the link across to Bitcoin was there. We thought that was going to be as close to Bitcoin NFTs as we were ever going to get, and now here we are. And it's funny that you mention that the Bitcoin that we see now is different to the Bitcoin we saw 10 years ago, and 15 years ago, 16 years ago at its inception, and what it might look like in 100 years. It's quite a hot topic right now, with quantum cats and taproot wizards and people's thoughts around whether OpCat's going to get activated, or OpCTV, or a number of other different potential upgrades, and how hard it is to actually upgrade something. It doesn't just happen, which I think is healthy, and that there's a number of stakeholders across Bitcoin, from the holders to the miners to the node runners to anyone. Yeah, it's a fascinating time. Like you said, now we have art on Bitcoin as well. And it's funny, this, this image in particular, like you said, it's like a futuristic, but almost in a sense, it also, for me at least, harks back a little bit. It's almost like temple-like, and we know that Bitcoin does, with all of these different stakeholders on Bitcoin and their different viewpoints on it, really drives almost like a religious fervor. I don't know. I feel like it's very pertinent piece.
Yeah, there's that famous temple that it was not a conscious thing, but yeah, when you say that, there's like a temple, like there's something futuristic about it, but there's also something ancient about it, and kind of spiritual, and that is the vibe that I'm trying to go with, with any type of megalithic structure that you'd come across. That's sort of the awe-inspiring nature of it, and then juxtapositioning that with the American West and the cowboy. I think it's just it's been a very enjoyable extension of the Bitcoin Trail collection in the sub-series of megaliths. That is what I've really enjoyed about it.
And it's great that you call it megaliths for a number of reasons. It's funny, obviously, Aaron from Inscribing Atlantis refers to Bitcoin as the digital megalith.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah, it's very poetic in that way. And on a lighter note, you've alluded to it. You said you had frogs in the Bitcoin Trail collection, and you referred to your prints. People can go and check out your creator profile on Gamma. But one piece in particular, which was collected, I think over 140 times. We'll say it's like 146 times. Was this one? I think it was around that Bitcoin frogs, goosenals. The ability to put your work, have your work, freely collected by people, which I think is also a really interesting thing about this sort of digital art renaissance, if you like, that your work can be, in the physical realm, be a lot harder for me to collect you than for me to be able to collect, jump onto any platform, obviously, naturally, this one being on Gamma, and collect a piece by yourself. But this one's a fun one. It, leaned right into the culture.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun making this one. To me, it was an easy decision to make it a free mint. I didn't think it through much other than that, just wanting to put some art out there for the people. And it was a time when goosenals, shout out to my fellow goosenal holders, honk honk. It's gonna, it'll come back, right? They'll come back, they'll fly again. But yeah, it was around that time, and it was just a funny image that I thought up, and I had posted a time lapse. That's kind of what I was doing with the whole proof of work thing, was I was showing all the time lapses of these sketches that I was doing at the time. And yeah, I'm stoked that a bunch of people grabbed it. And the free mint meta has been something that has has been important through ordinals and crypto's history, like Ordi and the frogs, and a lot of these, and goosenals, and a lot of these collections. There's like this whole free mint meta, and I was trying to think of how I could relate that and connect that back to what I wanted to do in connecting my physical art to the art on chain. So with this megaliths collection, what I'll be doing is releasing 2 a month as my Gamma prints, and there'll be free mints that will be your ticket to accessing a token gated store, and you'll be able to redeem each ordinal for a I shouldn't say redeem, but you'll get access to purchase a physical print. So you can collect the art for free on chain, but if you want to connect the ordinal and create an OCP, an on-chain certificate of provenance, for a physical print of that, there will be 48-hour drops where you can mint as many as you want during those 48 hours. And then you take your ordinal over to my token gated store, and you can buy yourself a print. And for each ordinal that you have, you can buy a print of various sizes for various price ranges. And then that ordinal ends up living as an OCP on that physical print and gets mailed to your door. And then you've got a cold wallet art piece of a megalith in your home. So that's the idea of how I'm connecting the free mint meta from the Schwonk piece there to what I'm currently doing with the megaliths.
Yeah, I like the connection. I like the segue. It's interesting that you bring that up, actually, because if you think about it, people were giving Bitcoin away in the early days. You could solve captures.
I tapped a faucet. I remember punching the button or whatever and being like, gosh, is this ever gonna amount to anything? You know.
If you ever find a faucet,
Not the OG drips, not those old, not there were ones even in like 2016, 2017 where you could be collecting a few dollars, you know, a few cents at a time or whatever. And I wish I would have just sat there tapping that a little bit longer.
Hindsight is a beautiful thing, isn't it? But you know, we can't live like that, as you know, both of us know. You know, Schwonk, as we start to wrap up, it's been an awesome discussion. It's been really fun diving deeper and finding out, you know, more and more what makes you tick in your story and how it all links together. The piece behind you, you know, like what's the story there? How can someone collect that? And like you said, you've put a lot of work into that. You know, just looking at it on the screen here, it's stunning. You know, like you said, sunsets and the cowboy and animals. Now, there's been a lot of what you've talked about linked into that piece as well.
Yeah. So this piece is called Radiant Reverie. I'm just going to give you a kind of, I don't know if the lighting is the best right now. You can check it out on my page. Yeah, I won't even attempt that right now.
No, we got a nice. It's stunning just from here.
Cool. So this piece to me reflects kind of where I'm at in my life, and having gone through the cancer healing journey, and then embarking on having children with my wife, and just getting back into starting my art career and feeling I'm really at a new beginning, end of one chapter and the beginning of another. It's kind of how I imagine this cowboy's feeling. He's at the end of a long day. He's put in a long work. He got up real early. He's not going to go. He's got a long ride ahead of him yet, and he's sore and he's tired, but he is loving what he's doing, and he's got this incredible beauty and so much to be thankful in front of him. And that's kind of what he's reflecting on in the painting Radiant Reverie. This painting is going to be listed on Gamma as an ordinal, which will be a 101 that will be listed for sale there as well. May end up doing some additions or something else. Haven't figured that totally out yet, but that's kind of the idea. Is I'd like to list this thing up there, and whether it sells IRL or on chain, that's cool. And that's also the way the Bitcoin Trail images 101s will be as well. They'll be available on my website. And I have some, I've got some Bitcoin Bear friends as well, believe it or not, that one of them bought the Bitcoin Bear, Bitcoin Trail piece for me in USD. And he didn't care to take the ordinal, but he just wanted to buy the Bitcoin Bear one, the guy riding the bear. So you can buy them for USD on my website, or you can buy them for BTC on chain off Gamma. And yeah, you can go either way and you'll end up with both. And we you know, my buddy who's the Bitcoin Bear, he's I don't think he's crying right now because gold's doing pretty well. He was like a Peter Schiff kind of guy, you know, but he definitely should have taken my advice. That's for sure.
So Schwonk, yeah, thanks so much for this chat. It's been really fun, and you know, to use something that you said before, obviously I'm looking forward to continuing the hike with you and seeing what's around that next corner.
Right on. Yeah. Thanks, Brett. Appreciate you very much. It's been a joy talking to you, and thanks for all you do and all Gamma does.